Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Derek Brown and by a special guest, Alfredo Brown from Football Guys. Alfredo, thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I like that Debro wore the appropriate shirt. Everything just kind of seems it's very welcoming, very inviting. So thanks, guys.
Yeah. I've been following you. I've been following your journey on Twitter, going through Succession, which has been fun since that was one of my favorite shows. And I wanted to ask you, how did you enjoy it as a binge? Because I quite liked it as a slow burn, watching, every episode every week as it came out. It was one of those kind of throwback shows where it wasn't a binge. What did you think of going episode?
It's a drug. It is a drug in every sense of the word, and it almost changes your mentality and your emotions. It hurt. Like, there was times where I was like, I need to go take a break. This is too much anxiety, and I was just ripping through seasons. And then I would tell my wife what happened, and she'd be like, you seem really emotional. And I was like, yeah, I got to go take a break. So I'm almost like, I'm happy it's done, but I can see how maybe going through seasons of it and years of it would have been a way better option.
Did you need to take a break after the Connor's wedding episode?
Oh, dude, that one got me. That one got me in the
Masterclass
field.
of television.
Yeah, that one got me right.
Masterclass of television.
I just want to throw this out there, disclaimer. I have not watched this show, so spoilers to a minimum, boys.
It's the rare scenario where I'm the one who's seen something and Debro hasn't, because usually you make fun of me for being too young.
Because your entertainment and movie takes are so bad sometimes.
I think they're pretty good, actually.
Well, of course,
I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, no bias in that opinion.
The audience agrees in the comments typically. That I'm not.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. We're gonna have to crowdsource.
All right. Well, that's enough preamble. Let's jump into the show. We are talking today. We're identifying breakout wide receiver ones, and this is a show we did last year, and it's actually sort of drawing from an article that we had on the site 2 years ago, where one of our freelance writers, he had this article. It was called "Identifying the Next Wide Receiver Ones," and he looked at in the previous decade. So this is 2012 to 2021. There were an average of 7 different wide receiver ones in PPR formats year over year that had changed. So you can't just kind of, copy paste who the guys were last year. It's likely to change at least about half those names. And during that same span, 34% of wide receiver ones first reach that mark in their third season. 20% do it for the first time in their second season, 16% in their fifth season, 11% in their rookie season. I know that's a lot of numbers. The big takeaway there is over 50%, over half of all players that become wide receiver ones do so for the first time in either their second or third seasons. So we're going to look at second-year wide receivers, we're going to look at third-year wide receivers, and we're also going to rank the rookie wide receivers in terms of their chances to fit into this category as well. Just to let everybody know, all of our early 2024 consensus rankings and tiers can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. We will dive in here. We're going to start with the third year guys, then we'll do second year, then we'll get to the rookies. So Alfredo, you are our guest. You can go first. Which name are you stealing from Debro here as your top guy for third year?
Beautiful
call. Man. All right, guys, we got to do it. I'm willing to step on this rake again and again and again. This time there's a Kirk Cousins rake, and I'm going to go with Drake London here. We've just been waiting for this, and we've all seen the talent and we've seen the opportunity. It's been there. Now the Falcons get Kirk Cousins coming in, and you try to piece as many things as you can together. It's not just Kirk Cousins coming in, it's Zach Robinson coming in, who's also going to be calling plays. And you go back and you kind of just look at a very small sample size. When Jordan Addison was the lead receiver for Kirk Cousins on the Vikings week 5 through 8, when Justin Jefferson was out, Jordan Addison was the wide receiver 7 in half PPR points per game, averaging 8 targets per game. That kind of target share is something that we've seen with Drake London throughout his career, and it would not surprise me one bit if we see that again here in Atlanta with Kyle Pitts and Kirk Cousins. When, by the way, the Kyle Pitts thing, it's not like the Vikings didn't have TJ Hawkinson already on the field there. So Drake London has a very realistic path to being top 10 in targets when you look at what the Vikings have done historically with Kirk Cousins, what the Rams have done historically with Zach Robinson being there. You start to piece together those numbers, and you're looking at probably somewhere around 35, 36 pass attempts per game. Drake London getting, let's say, a 25% target share. You're looking at a guy that could be hitting 150 targets in the season. And you start to look at the archetype that he is. He can play inside, play outside. He can do a lot of the same things that Puka Nacua can do, a physical route runner who can win at the catch point. We definitely want to see a little bit more better, movements after the catch, but he's a good route runner. He's a great hands catcher. This is the type of player that you take the risk on early in your draft because they can absolutely explode. And I think we're finally going to see it here with Drake London. I have him projected right now to be top 12 in targets, receptions, and receiving touchdowns. So yeah, it's all systems go. Drake London, top 12 wide receiver in 2024.
Yeah, definite smash. I'll clear the paint for Debro to agree with you in a second, but I just wanted to also add that, it's not just adding Cousins and Robinson like you mentioned. I like that you hit on the target share because they didn't add a big-time receiver. Like, there was a world where it would have been funny given what they've done in recent years, but, like, you could have justified them drafting Odunze with the 8th pick, instead of Michael Penix. You could have justified them adding another piece there. It's really concentrated with London and Pitts and whatever passing they do with Bijan. I am really excited for London this year. I think it's a very clear pick and a great pick by you, Debro. I know you agree.
Oh, hell yes. Drake London, I mean, all we've been waiting for is just competent quarterback play. I mean, I said this early in the offseason. I was like, before they signed Kirk Cousins, if you get him competent quarterback play, not even like amazing quarterback play, he's catching 95 to 100 balls. Just throw it out there because he's that freaking good, and he's always had the talent. We just haven't seen him allowed it to flourish with volume. And right now on FantasyPros, per our projections, I mean, right now he's and these are median projections. So right now he is projected to be 15th in receptions at 84.4 and 15th in receiving yards at just a shade over 1,100. And again, those are medium projections. And we're talking about for him to get top 12. I mean, I think he's going to be a wide receiver 1. I think that, look, if he has the type of season that I believe he can have, and I'm there because right now I have him as my wide receiver 10. And I think the conversation starts for him at wide receiver 7. I'm all in on Drake London, all in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to harp too much on like how obvious this is, but like it everything is aligning in place, right? There's there's so few like red flags you could point to. The one thing I wanted to ask you, Alfredo, is in a world where Cousins, let's say, like struggles coming back from the Achilles. Like Achilles is not like a nothing injury. In a world where he is like not at full strength or even is still injured and for whatever reason they need Michael Penix on the field, do you think stylistically London fits with what Penix likes to do too?
Yeah, I mean, you can see there's a little bit of what London does that translates over to a guy like Odunze and what we've seen historically at Washington. Michael Penix has been that vertical thrower. It's not like London can't win deep, and it's not like they don't have enough weapons. I know they didn't get major weapons, but like Darnell Mooney can stretch the field a little bit and take a safety away. You got Rondell Moore running around, even though he's like 4'8", like whatever. You got guys out there that can spread out the defense. So, would it drop Drake London if Michael Penix was the quarterback? Sure, of course. I don't think you're putting him in the top 12. You're probably dropping him a little bit closer to like the 18-20 range, but you're still going to end up with a productive guy just simply because the talent is there, the offensive system is there, the targets are going to be there. And that's the big thing. I think that the cherry on top that puts him over that hump is Kirk Cousins, and that's what puts him in that wide receiver 1 conversation.
Debro, who's the first guy you're picking here?
Well, I feel like this is the low-hanging fruit, but we got to mention it. I mean, this is the chalk pick of all chalk picks, but really, I mean, it's going to happen this year, guys. Assuming that Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, Garrett Wilson will be a wide receiver 1. And, I mean, we know the volume is there. Last year, I mean, he crushed in basically everything he could control as far as earning targets. 9th in target share, 5th in first read share. I mean, we're talking about a wide receiver that legit was already last year the wide receiver 5 in expected fantasy points per game, but because Zach Wilson is putrid, he was the wide receiver 32 in fantasy points per game. So all we need is better quarterback play. I think we get that. Aaron Rodgers already is doing everything he needs to do. He's a full go in camp. He's had more than a year coming off the Achilles. I'm not worried about it, man. Garrett Wilson to the moon. Wide receiver 1 this year.
Alfredo, we were talking about it before the show, and like you obviously agree with Garrett Wilson. Like Debro said, it's kind of low hanging fruit. Are there any red flags against Garrett Wilson? Is there a case you can make against him as one of the more obvious, potential wide receiver 1 breakouts?
Well, it's not fair because you're asking a Dolphins fan to find the negative in a Jets player, so I can do that with my eyes closed, man. But it's honestly, you could poke holes in any of the profiles for these guys. Like you could sit here and say, okay, Robert Saleh, he puts out a really good defense and that Jets defense is strong. Maybe they want to control the pace of games and not throw as much, and they won't be as behind as they were with Zach Wilson. They added Mike Williams, they added Malachi Corley. Maybe they want to establish the run a bit more. Like you could start to poke these holes, but at the end of the day, it just kind of boils down to you've got a very good quarterback, a very good receiver. He's going to earn the targets. Don't overthink it. It gets pretty simple for fantasy football.
Yeah, and Garrett Wilson, of all the guys we're going to name today, he is ranked the highest in our expert consensus rankings. This is half PPR, by the way. He's ranked the highest. He's wide receiver 7. He's the second guy in tier 2, so very aggressively being ranked there in the early rankings. And ADP is reflective of that as well. He's wide receiver 8, and he's going in the first round of drafts at the back end of the first round. So he is, somebody that everybody is agreeing on, and the case is really obvious there. So I thought there were two kind of clear names that we were going to start with, and those were the two names that we started with, Drake London and Garrett Wilson. There are other really interesting, exciting names I'm optimistic about, but those two kind of separated themselves for me. Alfredo, who's the next name you want to bring up?
Next name is a guy that I thought would break out last year, and he did kind of to an extent, just not as much as we really wanted to see, and it's Chris Olave. And last year it was not bad. 134 targets, tied for 12th, 15th in target share. Like, this was a guy who was still very productive. And now the Saints let Michael Thomas walk. They didn't really add any major target competition in free agency or the draft. And if we're being honest, Chris Olave had like the worst 1,100 yard, 80 catch season that we can remember. It seems like the way everyone talks about it and feels about it, you would have thought that he got like 600 yards and like a single touchdown, and it was just awful. Everything there in New Orleans was just really unlucky. With lack of touchdowns, missed throws deep. The Saints offense just had a horrible catch rate. It wasn't just an Olave thing. It was the same thing was happening with Rashid Shaheed and Michael Thomas. All of their receivers were outside the top 40 in catch rate. Now, Clint Kubiak comes in as the offensive coordinator coming in from San Francisco. The Niners led the league in passing plays of 20 plus or 40 plus yards. So we're going to get more explosive plays there from Olave and from Shaheed and these guys. And so the whole thing, just to like get a little football nerdy here, the problem with Derek Carr last year was he was doing a lot of these prayer balls. Like, he was just catching, throwing, and hoping the receiver would go track it down. What we're going to see a lot more from Kubiak this year is a lot more play action, which helped Derek Carr quite a bit more back in 2020 and 2021 when he was actually producing good fantasy wide receivers. We know Olave's a great route runner. We know he's got speed, he's got hands, he's got all of that. This should allow Carr and Olave a bit more time to get their timing down on those deep plays and actually just be able to use Olave. Stop sending him deep every single dang time. Like, you can have him run some intermediate routes and get Carr on the move with some play action. So I think we're going to see that. If you add just a couple of touchdowns last year, maybe some of those missed touchdowns from Carr, Olave would have been a top 12 wide receiver. So I think it's very much within the realm of possibility for him in 2024.
I was actually surprised to see Olave in ECR ranked as a top 12 guy. He's wide receiver 12 in the early rankings. Not because it's a bad ranking, but because of what you said about how it really felt like last year was a bigger disappointment than it even was. I was like very happily drafting Olave back half of the second round last year. If I was getting him in the early third, I was over the moon. I was very, very excited about Olave last year. And from that perspective, it did feel like a disappointment because it wasn't this superstar breakout that I was hoping for. But you're right. I mean, if we're looking 1,100 yards, 5 touchdowns is not amazing. It's not like he had 0, almost 90 catches. So perhaps the kind of narrative around Olave during the season last year was maybe harsher than it deserved. And maybe I shouldn't be surprised that he's being ranked as wide receiver 12. He's being drafted as wide receiver 11, so even higher than the rankings. Debra, what do you make of Olave this year?
It's a fantastic call by Alfredo. I love this so much because exactly what y'all are pointing out here. The narrative around his season and the reality of his season are two different things. I mean, he improved. From his rookie season to his second year, we wanted to see growth. The fact of it is it wasn't as much growth because of the complexion of the offense and Derek Carr not playing good as we hoped to see. But did we also see him best his rookie target volume? Yes. Did he have more receptions? Yes. Receiving yards? Yes. Did he also finish better in his second season as the wide receiver 19 versus his rookie season? Absolutely. And everything that Alfredo laid out there, the part that I love the most about it is when he talked about how Derek Carr played last year. We're talking about a quarterback that not only had the 8th most deep attempts, he had the 6th highest checkdown rate. So it was literally YOLO ball or dump it down to Kamara, and there was nothing in between. So I love that Alfredo brought up the difference in the offense this year because we know Olave can win the intermediate. Just let the man go out there, run routes over the middle, cook dudes, get separation, and we could see a lot of easier completions for him this year. If that happens, oh, dude, he's going to be a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, it's a great point. And my big kind of follow-up question that I was going to ask about was Derek Carr, but you've already addressed that. I think that I mean, it's hard to kind of sit here and say I'm optimistic about Derek Carr, but I think it's reasonable to expect that given the scheme change and what they're going to be trying to do on offense, you can at least expect him to be good enough to, support a guy that's really talented that we all think can be a wide receiver one. Debro, give me the last third-year guy we're going to talk about.
Oh, people are going to hate this, and I know they're going to hate it, and I'm prefacing this because it's always, oh, well, this guy burned me last year. And a lot of people didn't want to believe in him to begin with. But I'm bringing up Christian Watson here. And I know that I'm already getting the collective eye roll of everybody watching this on YouTube. And that's fine. But as much as everybody loves, and we're going to talk about it, so I'm not going to shade Jayden Reed too much. Everybody loves Jayden Reed. But they're all out on Christian Watson because of the hamstring and stuff. And look, I'm not going to get caught up in all the stuff about, oh, the guy's injury prone, he can't stay healthy. Dude, there's so many players, if you go back, that are injury prone until they're not. I mean, how many times do we play that game with Keenan Allen? How many times did we talk about this with Will Fuller, and then when he stayed healthy, he was freaking amazing? And the other thing I want to bring up with Christian Watson is, so I'm not worried about the injuries. It's baked into even more so with his ADP this year, but he has the talent to be a wide receiver one. And here's the other thing that people don't realize. When he was actually on the field playing at least 73% of the snaps, so weeks 5 through 13, he was the Packers wide receiver one. He led the team in that span when he was out there, and I'm not even saying like he was fully healthy, because I don't even thought even when he was playing a full-time role last year, I don't think we saw a fully healthy Christian Watson at any part of last season. That didn't stop him when he was a full-time player from leading the team in target share, air yard share, yards per route run. Yes, even better than Jayden Reed. End zone targets. He had 14 in that span. Demario Douglas, 7. First read share and first downs per route run. So basically, I could have just summed this up really quickly and saying everything we care about for wide receivers, when Christian Watson was on the field last year, he led Green Bay in everything. So why would we not think that Jordan Love's second year of this offense, and if he can reproduce what we saw in the back half of last year, because really, Christian Watson wasn't around when Jordan Love really took off down the back half of the year. So if both of those things coincide, and we do get health out of Christian Watson, I think all of the hype that we had and the hope that we had for his second year all comes back and pays off in his third season.
Yeah, I appreciate you picking somebody who's ranked much. I mean, the guys we already talked about are ranked in like the back half of, the top 12 already in terms of, the early rankings in ADP. Christian Watson's in like the mid 40s. So he's further down. And I really appreciate you kind of picking somebody that is maybe a bit bolder of a prediction. For me, like the question, you're making a very good case for why he could be the Packers wide receiver one. It's harder for me to see like a wide receiver one in terms of being top 12, just because there are mouths to feed, even if he's at the top of the food chain in that offense. And then they also added, Jacobs and your boy Marshawn Lloyd. And I just feel like there's just a lot. To me, I don't know that the targets will be high enough that without a lot of touchdowns, he can be a wide receiver one. And there's just a lot of options for guys to get touchdowns in this offense. So I see the upside case, but to me, like everything has to go right just because there's so many other options in that offense. What do you think, Alfredo?
I'll save most of my stuff because I am talking about Jayden Reed a little bit later. But I'll say this, and to Debro's point of Christian Watson, which I totally agree with, I think we learned last year, and we should have already known this, is just get pieces of good offenses. And when you know that there's going to be a good passing attack, a good quarterback, good offense, that they're going to be in scoring range, pretty much wherever they are on the field, get pieces of that. And oftentimes you can look and see who's going to be the cheapest piece of that. Could that be a guy like Dontavian Wicks? Sure. But if we're talking about the guy that could possibly break out into the top 12, I think the names we want to look at are going to be Christian Watson and a guy that I might talk about a little bit later.
Debra, last thought on just this offense in general. Any hesitation at all just about like Jordan Love really only did this for half a season at such an elite level? I mean, I'm with you. I'm very much thinking this Packers offense will be really good this year. I'm a full-on believer in Jordan Love, but do you have any hesitation of the sample size isn't that big yet?
Well, first I want to kind of highlight the point that you made about touchdowns. We're really worried about Christian Watson scoring touchdowns, Worm. In 20 career starts, he's scored 14 total touchdowns.
I didn't say I was worried. I said he needs to do it.
Touchdowns is not what I'm worried about with him. But to your point about Love, is there worries there? Yes. because we haven't seen him do it for a full season.
I'd even say, sorry to cut you off, I'd even say hesitation more than worries. I wouldn't even say like I'm concerned. It's just like, but just something in the back of my mind.
It's in the same ballpark. And I think they're fair to question, because have we seen Jordan Love do this for an entire season? No. Have we seen pretty much over the entirety of his career just as equal amounts of Jordan Love as really freaking good Jordan Love? Yes. So I get the hesitation. For me, I think this is one of those moments where it's like, am I going to hedge or am I going to be aggressive in drafts? And do I believe the small sample can be reproduced? I think it can be. And the parts and pieces is what we see out of Love, especially going into the second year as the starter, the system he's going to be comfortable with, as well as the rapport with his wide receivers. And if we get better health out of Watson, the offensive line, Luke Musgrave, all these parts and pieces of this offense, I think we could see another leap for Jordan Love. And I know that sounds crazy considering what he did down the back half of last year, but really, I can really make you an easy argument that I don't know if we've seen the true ceiling for the player yet.
The NFL draft is over. The teams are set. It's time to start looking ahead to the NFL season with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Get a jump start on the season with futures bets on division winners, win totals, stat leaders, and so much more. Explore the latest odds on which rookies will have the most passing or receiving yards, or check out futures for your favorite teams and players on the DraftKings Sportsbook app. One bet I'm looking at right now is the stacked Offensive Rookie of the Year race. Caleb Williams, the obvious heavy favorite at plus 175. I know Debro, of course, is all in on Jayden Daniels in fantasy at least. He's plus 650 for Offensive Rookie of the Year, same as Marvin Harrison Jr., J.J. McCarthy at plus 800, and Malik Nabers at plus 1,400 round out the top five. We're going to talk about a couple of those guys in our rookie segment, of course. I think you can make a reasonable case for any of those guys as reasonable bets at the values they're currently at. And if one of those rookie wide receivers does break out as a wide receiver one in fantasy, you can be sure they'll be strong contenders for that award too. However you plan to bet your NFL futures, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. New customers bet $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. That's code FantasyPros only at DraftKings. The crown is yours. So our third-year guys we picked were Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Christian Watson. Let's go to the second-year guys. Alfredo, we'll start with you again. Who's your first pick here?
So my first pick here is going to be Zay Flowers, the wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. And there's a lot of stuff that's similar to Olave. You get an older veteran who is soaking up some targets, leaving, right? OBJ leaves the Ravens, second on the team in targets. I'm not overly optimistic about Devontae Walker, who I think needs a lot to develop as he gets into the league. And I get it that the Ravens are saying we still have faith in Rashad Bateman, and it's like, what's the old X-Files phrase? I want to believe. Like, sure, I want to believe, but dude, when you play a full season and you still get out targeted by Odell Beckham Jr., I just don't know that it's there. And I really loved Bateman, so like that's saying something. For me, the thing was with Zay Flowers, in college, he was successful on deep routes. He just didn't run them all that often. He had a horrible quarterback, and then the same thing kind of happened in the pros. Not that he had a horrible quarterback, but the timing was just really, really off. And the Ravens tried to get him the ball in space and get the ball in his hands as much as possible. Let him create with that kind of spread style Todd Monken offense. But then you go and you look, and Zay Flowers was 45th in yards per route run and 82nd in average depth of target. Like it just was not good. This is not how you want to use such an explosive guy. Lamar Jackson attempted plenty of deep passes of 20 yards or more. The timing just wasn't there. He was 28th in adjusted completion percentage on those deep throws. So it's just, there's a little bit of Lamar learning a new system. There's timing to get down with a new player in Zay Flowers. There's also a little bit of a learning curve for Zay Flowers. I mean, maybe if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, maybe Zay Flowers just hasn't been great at tracking those deep balls, and that's something he'll need to improve on as well. I know a lot of people might also point to Mark Andrews being out of the lineup when Flowers saw a boost in fantasy points, but guys, it's not like Isaiah Likely wasn't out there producing as well. He came in and did plenty from the tight end position, and we really didn't see a whole lot change in terms of the target share because the numbers were really almost identical for Zay Flowers. So I'd argue that Mark Andrews returning opens things up a bit more for Zay Flowers, because now safeties are going to have to focus on Andrews and Likely and some of these other players. And defenses might even be stacking the box a little bit with Derrick Henry. I mean, we're forgetting now that he's on that team. So Zay Flowers has just a ton of room to break out even further in year number 2.
I have been surprised that there hasn't been more conversation around Zay Flowers this offseason. I think a lot of things are shaping up for a pretty good year from him. X-Files is not a show I have seen. I do still want to believe in Rashad Bateman also.
Get off the show. You have not seen X-Files, Worm?
No, I'm not like actively avoiding it. I've just never in my life been like, oh, it's time to watch X-Files.
Like you kind of really have to avoid it or try to avoid it. Like
what years was that show on? It was on from 93 to 2.
Don't go there. Don't know.
That show premiered the year after I was born. I wasn't like alive to be watching it.
It's not in black and white, Worm. Okay,
that sounds like he's calling you old.
It's not that old.
Is that what that?
I know. I feel like I'm getting aged here. Okay.
I didn't know that X-Files was like, I mean, I'm aware of the show and that's very popular. I didn't know it was so big that it was going to be this shock that somebody hadn't seen it. But
I shouldn't be so shocked you haven't seen it, but I am. Yeah, I still am. But anyway.
The point I was trying to get at is that I do still want to believe in Rashad Bateman. But what I was going to say is that even if he does take this leap that the Ravens are kind of putting on him to take, I don't think that's going to hurt Flowers too much because there's not a third guy. I mean, most offenses are going to have at least 2 good receivers, right, in this day and age with how much teams pass. So even if Bateman does take a step forward, I think A, he'll still be behind Flowers in the pecking order, and B, there's not a third guy unless you start looking at the tight ends. So I'm not really worried about, even if Bateman does take this big step forward, that really hurting Zay Flowers. To me, and it's not even Andrews, it's if they want to do more of Andrews and Likely on the field together. I'm curious to see how they kind of do that and how that might impact, the actual receivers on the team. But all that said, that's like a minor red flag. I'm very excited about Flowers this year. I think, again, I don't think there's been enough discussion about, I love second-year wide receivers, a guy who's a clear number 1 in the offense in terms of at the receiver position, who's got an elite quarterback, maybe not elite at the exact skill set that fits best with Zay, but is a very good quarterback. Second year of an offense. There's just so much to like here. And D-Bro, you actually also picked Zay Flowers for one of your second-year breakouts.
Oh, yeah, man. Again, I do think the volume needs to be turned up on Zay Flowers as far as what we could see. I don't really understand, what's the downside here? We've seen a rookie wide receiver that proved he could earn high volume. He had a high first read share. And this is a consolidated passing offense with also an offensive coordinator who picked up the pace. Their passing rate, fine. That was very mid last year. It doesn't really matter if you're running at the pace that Baltimore did to close the season. We're literally talking about the same type of diagram that the Philadelphia Eagles did with Jalen Hurts, that what I think we see out of Anthony Richardson in Indy this year, as far as a middle-of-the-road neutral passing rate team that flies at a high pace. In Baltimore, we didn't see that until last season. So now second year of this offense, second year for Zay Flowers. We talked about this. You mentioned the numbers at the top of the show where I'm second-year wide receivers that we've seen flash in their rookie season are strong bets to make every single freaking year. So yes, I'm massively in on Zay Flowers. And what we saw, even if people want to poke holes, when Andrews was out, you're telling me he earned the entirety when Andrews was out. So week 11 through the rest of the season, he earned a 30.7 first read share, and during that stretch, we saw him ranked 20th in fantasy points per route run, and he can't be a wide receiver 1? I believe it. I believe it. I love this call.
So, Alfredo, obviously you don't need to draft Flowers as a wide receiver 1 to get him. He's going in that mid-20s range. He's ranked wide receiver 27 in consensus. His ADP is wide receiver 25. Where would you be interested in drafting him, given the upside that you see?
Oh, man. So I'm looking at my rankings now. I've got him around wide receiver 23. And
that's beautiful.
I can be talked into moving that up even a little bit, especially when you just start to look at I've got him next to Devontae Smith, and I think there's a very real case that the upside might be higher for Zay Flowers as his team's wide receiver 1. So I'd be comfortable taking him in that early wide receiver 20 to 25 range, no problem.
Yep. Yeah, I've got him at wide receiver 22.
Yep.
Yeah, we're basically saying the same thing. I've got him at wide receiver 22, and he is inside my top 50 overall players. I got him at 48th. And I think that he's in not a long tier, but I think if you were to tell me right before week 1, both Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers are going in the 3rd and 4th round of drafts right now, I'm not going to be surprised.
All right, so that was one of your picks as well, D-Bro. So give me your second guy that you're picking.
So again, investing in second-year guys that flashed in their rookie season, and I understand this wasn't the flash that we were all hoping for out of his rookie season. I'm not willing to bury Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I think he can break out. And I think if you look at the deeper metrics in his usage, which was, let's just get this out there, was criminal last year. The way they used him in Seattle was absolutely criminal. And we also, because this is also, we don't talk about things that are not brought up on a consistent basis. All the hurt and disappointment about Jaxon Smith-Njigba always gets brought up, and it's always like, well, yeah, we didn't really factor in enough for Tyler Lockett. Can we also talk about he walked into the season dealing with a wrist injury, and he wasn't fully healthy until probably half the season, if not later into the season? So that doesn't get equated enough into what we talk about how his rookie year played out. So now we want to go into the deeper numbers of how he was used, because this was also a huge narrative of him coming out as a prospect. Can he win on the outside? Is he just a slot wide receiver? I don't know if he can really do that or stretch the field. If you look at the deeper metrics for Jaxon Smith-Njigba, I want him to play out more wide this year. And I think that can happen. We have a new offensive coordinator, and anybody that tells you they know exactly how the Seattle offense is going to run is lying to you, because none of us know. And could we go with the low-hanging fruit of saying the narrative of being like, oh, well, they have a defensive-minded head coach, so they're going to run the ball. Sure. Okay, now how about we talk about the fact that they added an offensive coordinator who let Michael Penix just grip it, rip it, and chuck it down the freaking field last year. So I don't know what this offense is going to look like this year, as to say is the range of outcomes for what they could be is wider than people are willing to discuss. And we don't know what this offense is going to look like. So saying that Jaxon Smith-Njigba, considering what he showed in his rookie year, cannot play outside is ridiculous. Because if you look at amongst 126 qualifying wide receivers last season, out wide, he ranked 4th in targets per route run. He was 15th in yards per route run. And guess what? His ADOT didn't change much at all. He was 6.5. Versus if you look at his slot numbers, 78th in targets per route run, 87th in yards per route run. His ADOT was 6.2. He was much, much better with the perimeter route tree that they tasked him with. So put him on the perimeter, let him go do his damn thing, and if we get more passing volume and deep shots in this offensive line, because we've also talked about the Seattle offensive line and how bad they were last year, if all those things come to fruition this season, I know it's a lot of ifs, I'm just betting on talent and a player that if you look at the real numbers for him, he had a much better rookie season than people are giving him credit for.
I was going to ask a follow-up to you, Debro, but I'm going to give you a chance to catch your breath after that.
I had to lay it out there, man, because I know people are going to hate that call, and they're going to say, yeah, but I got burned by JSN. Nah, it's going to be run first office. Nah, all that crap. I know it's going to happen.
Well, so Alfredo, I don't know where you stand on JSN and if you're optimistic on him or not. If you are optimistic, if you're looking at a pie chart of reasons why, what percentage of that is like his evaluation as a prospect? Because I adored him coming into the NFL versus the flashes that Debro's referencing that you might have seen in his rookie year.
So I am optimistic on JSN. I've got him in my top 40 wide receivers for fantasy this year, and I kind of did that disagreement with my co-host the other day. And for me, so much of it, if we're talking about the pie chart of what it is, I'd say it's about 40% knowing that he's already got the talent, right? The other 60% to me, because we see so many good, talented players just not get the usage that they deserve and a good offense.
Drake London.
Exactly. And what I love is Ryan Grubb coming in as the new offensive coordinator for this team and bringing in that same offense we assume that he used in Washington. And Debro, the thing that you pointed out was the injustice of how JSN was used last year on these shallow targets. Talking about a guy that was 77th in average depth of target, which is just absolutely nuts. And the thing is, I don't even think it matters if he's going to get used in the slot or out wide. Ryan Grubb was able to use his slot wide receivers downfield all the time. We saw that with Jalen McMillan. We saw that when Jalen Polk would go inside into the slot. And even back in college, this was one of the things I remember putting on the scouting report for JSN, is that he is surprisingly good at tracking the deep ball from the slot. So I don't know what the Seahawks staff was looking at last year when they utilized him, where they're like, let's just use this guy in really short incremental routes. He's incredibly talented with the deep ball, and I think that Ryan Grubb is going to unlock that quite a bit.
I'm happy to hear that you guys are both very excited about that pick, because I do think, to Debro's point, like you think of historically, like the first wide receiver drafted in year 2, like people are usually pretty excited about that. And I think you're right, Debro. I don't think a lot of people are really, sort of feeling the love for JSN going into this season just because of, the disappointment of last year. But I think that those are really strong cases to be made. In
there's
his favor.
also this certainty that they know Seattle is going to be run heavy. And I just push back against that because I'm like, no, we really don't know that, considering this marriage of the offensive coordinator and the head coach.
Yeah, I know that he's a defensive guy. Obviously, I know Mike McDonald is a Ravens fan, but I mean, it's a first-year head coach. We don't know what kind of offense he's going to see as the correct one to run. And
if you want to be run heavy, why the hell did they bring in Ryan Grubb? Tell me that.
Yeah.
Why would that marriage make sense?
That's the best point of all. Yeah, in terms of the run heaviness. So, yeah, we can move on from that one. Alfredo, who's your next second-year guy you're picking?
I got to talk about Tank Dell, man. Like, this is the guy that, had we seen a full season from him, I think we'd all be a lot more excited. And I'll get into, like, I'm not worried about Stephon Diggs. I talked about it so much on my last episode that we did of the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show, where I talked about Stephon Diggs as a rankings faller. There's 1,000,001 reasons as to why, but we're talking about Tank Dell and why he could be the breakout top 12 rookie or top 12 wide receiver. Last year, you look at what he was able to do, man, and he hit all the metrics that you wanted to see. He was 16th in yards per route run, second highest amongst the rookie class. And Nico Collins was also 12th in average depth of target. So, I mean, you're looking at this team who was able to win deep, and that's what CJ Stroud liked to do. He led all quarterbacks in average depth of target. So this is a team that wants to throw the ball down the field. That's something that Stephon Diggs started to struggle with quite a bit last year. So people being worried about Stephon Diggs coming in here, honestly, I do think we're going to see quite a bit of Stephon Diggs going to the slot and quite a bit of Tank Dell being able to win on the outside. This offense wants to win deep. They want to win on intermediate routes. That's what Tank Dell was doing really well last year. Digs, out routes, corners, comeback routes. He was able to do those phenomenally. I'm just absolutely enamored by the study of first downs per route run and how that translates to more fantasy predictability. Shout out to Ryan Heath over at Fantasy Points.
Yes, sir.
Because he's doing the Lord's work right now, putting together that data. And finding that it's the most predictive stat of fantasy success. And when you look at it, Tank Dell was I got it written down here. He was number 13, 14. And 11 out of those 13 players ahead of him finished as top 12 wide receivers. So you're telling me this is like the results are absolutely there. The numbers make sense. They matter. And Tank Dell's got it. Like you could just watch him, man. Just watch him. And I know people hate that of like, watch the film, bro. Just watch the game. Trust me. But like, this is a very good player. The path for Tank Dell to be a top 12 or at least top 15 wide receiver is extremely realistic with CJ Stroud and with that offense. I love the discount that we're getting because of Stephon Diggs being added to that team. And I mean, the ADP, average draft position right now for Tank Dell, wide receiver 27, is just insanely good value. So yeah, I'm going to take that all day. And guys, I don't know about you, but I'm really, really excited about the Texans offense going into 2024.
Yeah, I feel like every time we have a conversation about any Texans player on this show, I just come away thinking, like, as much as I love the depth at quarterback this year, I might just need to make sure I get Stroud in a lot of places because I just love so many of the pieces there and how I think it's all going to come together. I'm just very excited about this offense in general. But yeah, Dell is a big part of that. Even a more rudimentary, metric, rather than kind of stuff you were diving into. If full season pace was like over 1,000 yards and almost 11 touchdowns as a rookie who was not a first round pick, who was quote unquote undersized. I mean, it's just very exciting what we've literally seen him do when he's on the field, let alone what we think we can project him to do going forward. So I love this call. And I think you can make a reasonable case for various iterations of how you want to rank the options in the Texans passing offense. But if I'm ranking the ones who I think have the best chance of being a top 12 receiver, I'm starting that list with Tank Dell. Just the connection that he and Stroud had last year it was obvious to anybody watching the game, just based on the eye test alone, how much he liked throwing to him. Debra, I know you're a Tank Dell guy as well.
Yeah, I love Tank. And it's funny because I put this out on Twitter. I think it was the day before Stephon Diggs got traded there. And I already felt like the disrespect for Tank Dell was real because of just what people saw in the end of the season taste that was left in their mouth. Like with Tank not being there and Nico getting alpha level volume, But if you look back at last year, even before Diggs was there, when Nico and Tank were playing full-time roles, so in the 7 full games that they both played, Tank bested him in everything. He had a higher target share than Nico. He had a higher air yard share, higher weighted opportunity, and he beat him in fantasy points per game. So the only small modicum of worry that I have for Tank Dell, and this is part of me just trying to bake some things like learn from year over year. It was the injury he sustained, and is he going to be 100% go for when the season happens? And I'm optimistic. I think it's going to happen. I have him ranked. I kind of bounce him between low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver on the daily. So I'm fully in on this, because if he is 100% and he's ready to rock, yeah, he can get there, man. He absolutely can.
Debra, let's stick with you for your next second-year pick.
So this one, I'm going to say the chances of this working out are very slim, but it's a guy, if we're going into this bucket of second-year wide receivers and trying to mine value, especially in the later rounds, a guy that when we saw him actually as a full-time starter, he earned volume, and now, look, I know a lot of people are willing to, pick up their favorite wide receiver from the New England Patriots right now. Is it Javon Baker? People loving Kendrick Bourne because of what he's done in previous seasons. It could be Pop Douglas. If he can retain the starting role on that team, in the 8 games we saw him play at least 50% of the snaps, there is a lot to like about Pop Douglas. And some of this comes down to, look, I don't know who's going to be the starter for the Patriots in week 1. If it's Jacoby Brissett or if it's Drake May. If it's Jacoby Brissett, what's wrong with that? Haven't we seen enough out of Jacoby Brissett to call him basically the dollar store version of Geno Smith? He's played extremely freaking good when he's been on the field over the last 2 years. So saying that he can't do that in New England, I'm not willing to do that, especially because he also knows the system. And with that type of quarterback play, looking at that high of a floor, and much less even the ceiling of what either one of those guys could provide if Drake May were to hit the ground running. Pop Douglas last year in those 8 games, at least 50% of the snaps, 20.8% target share, 24.4% first read share. Both those led the team. So if none of these other guys can grab that number 1 wide receiver throne and take it over, I'm not willing to rule it out being Pop Douglas. And is there a hard case to make for him being a wide receiver 1? Yes. But what do we talk about, guys? It all comes back to volume, and we believe that talent dictates earning targets, and that's the way it goes. So we saw Pop do that in his rookie season. I'm not going to count him out that he could do that in his second year.
Debra, you make an admirable case, but I think this sort of reflects what we talked about before the show, that it's kind of hard to pick second-year guys this year.
It is.
Obviously, Puka already did it, so he's not eligible.
Yeah.
And then a lot of those first-rounders, like, relative to expectations, maybe disappointed, or they're in an offense with Justin Jefferson, or, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the fact that we're getting to Pop Douglas, not a knock on him. I think he's a perfectly good player, but you're right. It is kind of hard to see that case. And again, you did a good job, attempting it, but there's just not that many names that are that thrilling as, in the third year guys, it was, oh yeah, clearly, like, he's already being ranked that way. It's not really the case with the second year guys. So, and I think Douglas reflects that. Alfredo, do you have any quick thoughts on Douglas?
I think he's a fine player. I think that the way that the Patriots drafted allows for Douglas to still have a role. They drafted guys that want to win on the outside and win a little bit deeper. And I think that Douglas is still going to have that nice role in the slot. I've still got him around that like wide receiver 50 to 60 range next to guys that are similar, Josh Downs, players like that. When I turned on the film to watch Pop Douglas last year, I was pleasantly surprised. He was one of those guys that I probably overlooked in the pre-draft process. And when I got to see him actually get out there and earn targets and earn playing time, that was the biggest thing. So, I mean, the talent's there. We just got to see who's going to be the quarterback for this team and how good that offense is really going to be.
So the only thing I'll add here is I would have picked, if we didn't have all of the off-field stuff going on and we don't even know when he's going to play, I think the easy answer to add to this segment would have been Rashee Rice. But we have no clue when even we're going to see him this season. So it's a guy that I couldn't add to this list.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that he, based on profile and everything, is, maybe more exciting than some of these other names, but obviously has a pretty big red flag there. Alfredo, who's the last second-year guy you're going to bring up?
By the way, before I say this guy, I mean, It's sad to hear that Jordan Addison just retired. I guess we're just going to ignore him here entirely. I think there's just probably some uneasiness there, but the guy that I want to talk about here is Jayden Reed, and we talked about wanting pieces from that good Packers offense, and I actually wanted to go originally with Jaxon Smith-Njigba, but I think that the path for Jayden Reed to be top 12 or even top 15 is a little bit clearer than it is for Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Jordan Love appears to be a better quarterback than Geno Smith at the moment. That offense seems to be just a little bit better, not as much transitioning going on. And the Packers offense should just be getting better in general. It's a bunch of players that are no longer rookies and lining up in the wrong spot and running routes to the wrong place. This is going to be a quarterback getting his second full season as the starter. And it took a little while for not only Jordan Love, but for Jayden Reed to get going. And once Jayden Reed did get going from week 7 on, he was the wide receiver 14 in points per game. He was top 25 in first downs per route run, yards per route run, which means he wasn't just this gadget guy. He was actually being relied on downfield when it mattered most. He was the dependable guy, keeping drives alive for Jordan Love. And so much of that for when quarterbacks take that next step early on in their careers. And I know Jordan Love's been in the league for a while, but he hasn't been starting for a while. It's finding the guys they can depend on. Quarterbacks are humans too. And mentally, it's finding the guy he can depend on consistently. And that guy was Jayden Reed. And I mean, the top 12 in targets per route run is the thing that really sticks out to me. It's ahead of guys like Garrett Wilson and Stephon Diggs and Puka Nacua. So if I really want to hang my hat on something that says that Jayden Reed can go out there and earn targets, which I know Debro actually, he laid it out very nicely that when Christian Watson was on the field, he was earning more. The tough thing is Christian Watson going to be on the field? So if I'm going to pick someone that I can draft a little bit later that has that high upside, that can also be used anywhere on the field, slot, out wide, even taking some snaps out of the backfield, which he did quite a bit with some rushing touchdowns. Yeah, I'm going to look at Jayden Reed, and I love the draft value for him right now. So we could see even better production for him in 2024.
Debro, as somebody who plays in a dynasty league with you, I can say that you have aggressively been selling Jayden Reed. Is that a reflection of your just excitement about Christian Watson? Do you have a problem with Jayden Reed, the player, or you just think you can kind of sell high and get good value on him?
I think you can kind of sell high, like in dynasty circles, you could sell high on him. Is the talent there for Reed? Absolutely. I think really what we're trying to paint here is a picture also that we're investing in a good offense, and one of these guys we believe is going to pop. And, so it could be like, pick your flavor. Is it Christian Watson? Is it Dontavian Wicks? Is it Jayden Reed and stuff? I think you could make a case for a lot of these different guys based off the efficiency metrics. What scares me a little bit about Reed is, do we get that Dairy Belt Deebo Samuel usage again this year? It could happen. It's possible. But I don't know if it's definitively going to happen, considering, and again, do we get some more of those short area targets of the running back usage with Marshawn Lloyd, that maybe those touches went to Jayden Reed out of the backfield last year? And the other thing is, Jayden Reed wasn't even a full-time player in the offense. So there's some parts and pieces like, can Jayden Reed get there? Is this offense good enough? Is the quarterback play good enough? Is he good enough as a player? That's all possible. There's just some hurdles that I think he has to overcome to get there, but there's a path for it.
By the way, since Alfredo brought him up, I actually do think it's worth kind of just quickly addressing Jordan Addison, because obviously, if you look at the first round wide receivers, which are the guys that you would think would be the natural fits here, obviously nobody's picking Quentin Johnston, and we named the other two, but we didn't name Jordan Addison. For me personally, and I'm not, picking these players, the reason I would shy away is, we're all expecting Justin Jefferson to be a wide receiver one, and it's really hard for me to imagine J.J. McCarthy in year one, given the limited experience he had throwing the ball at Michigan, supporting two wide receiver ones. And if we're just locking in Jefferson as one of those guys, it's hard to see a second. Debro, I know you are as big a J.J. McCarthy fan as any. Do you think there's a case to be made for Addison here, or are you obviously had the chance to pick him and chose not to?
I know, because here's the reality of Jordan Addison's rookie season. I hate to tell people this, but he is clinically massively overrated. If you look at all the things that we should be focusing on in his first year and looking at how you project those to his second season, the guy lived off of touchdowns. It was all touchdown production, and that only got him into wide receiver 3 territory. If you look at the deeper metrics for Jordan Addison, the reason I didn't bring him up here is because he didn't prove that he can either be efficient enough outside of the touchdowns, which are fluky year over year. We know this. The deeper metrics, and one of them that Alfredo alluded to and talked about Ryan Heath, and shout out to Ryan Heath again. He was 58th in first downs per route run. He was 51st in yards per route run, and this is amongst 81 qualifying wide receivers. Those two numbers scare the ever-loving bejesus out of me, considering, okay, so what are we hoping for? That he replaces 10 touchdowns in his rookie season? That only got him up to being a wide receiver 3? Now, there's a reason I left Jordan Addison off my list, is because I don't have a lot of faith in it at all.
That's interesting. I have not thought of him as overrated. I see what you mean about being like somewhat dependent on the touchdowns last year, but he was also a 21-year-old rookie who was playing with like some pretty poor quarterback play in the back half of the season. So I still find myself fairly, I mean, again, I wouldn't pick him as a wide receiver 1, but I still find myself somewhat optimistic about him as a player. What do you make of Addison, Alfredo?
I think if you're trying to galaxy brain a little bit here and you want to be maybe sneaky with your league, if you see him falling in your drafts, in redraft, and you want to just take him as one of these late round flyers, you can do that because you're likely not going to be seeing TJ Hawkinson to start the year. And if Sam Darnold comes out there and starts and you get maybe a little bit of some offensive production, you could get a few good weeks from Jordan Addison and he immediately becomes a trade block kind of guy that you put out there. So there's some redeeming value. I just don't see him as the guy that could be breaking out into top 15, let alone top 24.
Yeah, just to throw this out there, he was 4th in receiving touchdowns last year, behind only Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, and CeeDee Lamb. Do any of us believe that he can reproduce that in his second season? I don't.
No, but my point was I'm more so optimistic about him long term than I am particularly for this upcoming season. The second year guys that we picked, just a quick recap here: Zay Flowers, which we picked twice. Both guys had him. Then JSN, Tank Dell, Demario Douglas, or Pop Douglas, and Jayden Reed. So I asked you guys to rank the chances for your top 5 rookies to finish as wide receiver 1s in their rookie seasons. You had the exact same top 3s. You both had Marvin Harrison Jr. 1, Malik Nabers 2, Odunze 3. I think the cases are obvious for Harrison and Nabers, and if you guys want to hit on them, you're welcome to, but I think those are very clear. They're going to be high-level target earners in their offenses. They're uber talented prospects who went high in the draft. I think those are clear. Odunze, I was a little surprised, given we already talked about it with JSN, what we just saw from a talented rookie. And I know JSN, we like Odunze better than JSN was as a prospect, but a talented rookie, first-round pick, coming in as the 3rd in the pecking order in that offense with the literal same offensive coordinator that we just saw do this to JSN. So as much as I love Odunze and, Dynasty, different story, I was a little surprised that you guys both had him 3. Alfredo, is this just strictly you love the prospect so much, or do you see something in this Bears offense where there's maybe a path to him kind of exceeding expectations in terms of the type of target share we might think he would get?
I mean, obviously the prospect profile does play a good bit here. He is a much better prospect than JSN was or even is now as a pro. But there's also these are different players. Like we can't go in there and say that he's immediately the 3rd wide receiver. He's going to be lining up on the outside quite a bit more. I know Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator who was with Seattle last year, I know he likes to use 11 personnel, which is 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. He likes to do that plenty. But there's also a very realistic expectation here that when they do go to 2 wide receiver sets, it could actually be Odunze who's out there, and they want to keep Keenan Allen healthy and bring their older slot wide receiver off the field. And I also I will follow this narrative quite often. Rookie quarterbacks with rookie wide receivers, they get extra time together in these mini camps. They're going out to press conferences together. They're going to local games. Just guys being dudes, becoming friends, and getting that correlation together, that rapport. So I know that's one of those intangible things, but I think there's a chance that we see a sort of DK Metcalf, Robert Woods hybrid role here for Odunze in Shane Waldron's offense. And those are 2 guys that he's coached in the past. So I wouldn't be surprised if Odunze does give us some fantasy value, and we probably see it happen a little bit later down towards the end of the season. He's 1 injury away from being a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy.
Where are you ranking Odunze and where are you ranking Keenan Allen?
Let me pull it up. I've got Odunze right now as my wide receiver 39, and I've got Keenan Allen as my wide receiver 32, which I know is probably shockingly low for how good Keenan Allen was last year, but I think Odunze is that good, and I just don't know. This is a for and against. I don't think that we see Caleb Williams, for as great as he is, support 3 fantasy relevant wide receivers. They've got 2 tight ends. They've got a pass catching running back. There's a lot that can be done out there. But if I'm going to go and target one of these guys, I'm going to target Rome Odunze because I think the ceiling is higher and the cost is just going to be so much less.
What do you think about that, D-Bro?
Yeah, I mean, we're basically in lockstep. I've got Keenan Allen in that low end wide receiver 2, high end 3 range. Rome. I think the conversation, like I've got him at wide receiver 36 right now, but I think somewhere in the wide receiver 3 range. It really, I mean, Alfredo just crushed this. He's one injury away, and yes, I love that he brought up that these are absolutely different archetypes of players. So if you're trying to even transpose what we saw in Seattle to this, if you want to talk about who's going to play the JSN like short area role, that's Keenan Allen. That's not going to be Rome Odunze.
D-Bro, just before we move on from the big three, for the audience members who maybe aren't as like way in the weeds with Dynasty and rookies, pick one of Harrison or Nabers and make the case for why they have a good shot at this.
I mean, and then Harrison Jr. is going to be the guy. I mean, but the thing about it is we're already projecting that because he's a wide receiver 1 in almost everybody's ranks, you know? So that's not crazy. I think just the easy case is the volume. You know, you look at the volume for him and the volume is not hard to see, man. And it's not hard to see him getting up there. Like looking even at Arizona's passing volume last year, he threw it 555 freaking times. If he earns a 25% target share, that would have been 13th in targets amongst all wide receivers last year. So what if he earns like a 26, 28% target share? If he's that freaking good and it's only literally him and Trey McBride to fight over targets. Like that's the easiest case to make for him being a wide receiver 1. And I don't disagree with it. Like he's a wide receiver 1 in my ranks.
Yeah, I like I said, the easy case is the volume. The easy case might also just be that he's like a generational prospect in most people's eyes and one of the best receivers to enter the league in quite some time. Alfredo, I want to ask you about Malik Nabers then, sort of the same thing though. The volume, ability to earn a target share is very obvious in this offense. And also just, again, like not a generational prospect, maybe, I don't know. Some stats had him, up there with Harrison, obviously this year, but really, 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 really good.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that worries me is not the talent with Nabers, and long term, I think he's perfectly fine for Dynasty. I do think there's a possibility we see a New York Giants rebuild because this could be one of the worst offenses in the league, and they could be really, really bad this year. So we could see new quarterback, new coach, a whole new everything next season. So for Dynasty, that's the smallest concern, but he's just too talented for me to really care too much about that. For redraft, I think the floor could fall out like from underneath him, and it's not a reflection of him as a player. It's just Daniel Jones is the quarterback, guys. And if Daniel Jones, like even if he plays well enough to keep the job, the best season that he's had out of a wide receiver has been wide receiver 25 with Sterling Shepard. Nabers is better than that. So how high does the ceiling really get? Are we thinking maybe best case scenario we're looking at Malik Nabers? It's like a wide receiver 18 on the season. And I know in underdog drafts, he's going as like wide receiver 19 or 20. I've got him ranked quite a bit lower. I've got him around wide receiver 28 right now. I struggle with the risk of how bad that offense could be. And what I see is very similar to what we saw last year, where Bryce Young and the Panthers offense was really bad. And even though Adam Thielen was getting a ton of targets, there just wasn't enough valuable targets on that offense. And there wasn't enough touchdowns to go around. And Thielen finishes the wide receiver 25 in points per game. So I think there's a very similar path for Malik Nabers to kind of finish the same way.
So like I said, Harrison 1, Nabers 2, Odunze 3. You guys are in lockstep there. 4 and 5 are where you guys differ. Alfredo, who are your 4 and 5 and why?
So I've got Brian Thomas at 4. And for me, it's based on the trends of Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence. We'll probably see Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram be the top target earners on this team and probably get about like 250 targets. Now, when you start to break down the numbers and the projections, you're looking at potentially about 200 more targets that are going to be split between Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas. And that's just based on how Trevor Lawrence has targeted players in the past. And Brian Thomas, I think, is the far better player than Gabe Davis. And so you're looking at a guy who could be earning 6 to 7 targets per game and could be really explosive, especially with his downfield ability. So if I'm going to project that, I know there are some things he does need to clean up in his game and get a little bit more nuanced with his route running and better release package and stuff like that. But I think this was a very intentional pick. The Jaguars want to use Brian Thomas the kind of similar way they used Calvin Ridley last year, and I don't think that's a bad thing. And then at 5, I've got Xavier Worthy, who very similar to Brian Thomas, could see heavy target share, explosive plays, all the same jazz I said before, except now we've got Patrick Mahomes, a much more proven quarterback. I think the problem here is that he could be 3rd or maybe even 4th in line for those targets. I don't think the targets will be as easy to earn. We have to see what happens with Rashee Rice. And I mean, you also get a little bit of like the Venn diagram crossover with Marquise Brown, who can do some very similar things to Xavier Worthy. So both these teams, it feels like they went out and they bought they bought the players that they already had at home, and it's going to be difficult for them to earn targets. But if they do, and if they're on the field, they could surprise the heck out of a lot of people.
That's a good way to put it. The players they already had at home. Deeper, who do you have 4 and 5?
I've got Worthy at 4, and I think that just the case is easy to make. It's Patrick freaking Mahomes. Hollywood Brown, we can't trust his health at this point in his career. He's had so many foot injuries. He had one last year too. So I can't really put it on him to play a full complement of games. Rashee Rice, we don't know when we're going to see him. So we could Kansas City in the worst iteration of this offense. If Rashee is out and Hollywood's hurt, it literally could be Travis Kelce and Xavier Worthy competing for the target lead every single week. And that's not hard to visualize this year. So Worthy's my number 4. Lad McConkey is my number 5 here. And people could be surprised by that with all the narratives of the Chargers offense and how much they're going to run. You still have freaking Justin Herbert throwing the ball, man. You still have Justin Herbert throwing the ball. And this is a wide receiver room that where if you want to talk about the clear path to earning that type of wide receiver 1 volume, if the passing rate surprises, like maybe the Bolts defense is not great this year, maybe they're trailing more than they anticipate, maybe they can't run the ball that dang well considering it's Gus the Bus with 2 flat tires and it's J.K. Dobbins. We don't know if he's going to make it out of camp. We're hoping Kamani Vidal is a guy and a thing this year. Like, if those things don't happen, maybe the Chargers throw the ball more than even Greg Roman or Jim Harbaugh want to do this year. And we're just talking about who has a clear path to earning volume. And Lad McConkey, like, we know the talent is there. You look at his entire prospect profile, it's littered with stuff that makes you go ooh and ah. And so what are we talking about? The volume? There's a clear path there. So I'm going to go Lad off the beaten path here a little bit.
Last thing, was there any rookie receiver that if we had gone deeper, you really wanted to include as a possibility? I mean, I know, Debro, you're not a fan of Keon Coleman, but obviously the opportunity to earn targets is likely going to be there. I mean, Xavier Legette was a first-round pick. I don't think we would certainly expect that. Were there any other names that stood out, Debro?
The one, if we're going to go further down the board, and the easy case to make for him is T. Higgins moves on or T. Higgins is hurt. And Joe Burrow, we've seen it time and time again, can support 2 wide receivers and do it really freaking well. It'd be Jermaine Burton.
Alfredo, was there a name for you that you wanted to include but didn't have room?
Very similarly, if someone gets hurt or someone misses time, and this happens in this offense quite a bit, Ricky Pearsall becomes really valuable, player that I like so much. And he's in one of the best offenses in the league. And I get it. They've got Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle and all those guys. But I mean, I don't think there's a player on their offense that I could list right now that hasn't missed their fair share of games in their career. So I think there's a reason that they invested a first-round pick in this guy. Even with all the other players healthy, they want to use him. He's kind of like okay, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say he's like Debo, but there are some things that he can do that fits the style. And Ricky Pearsall, if he gets an opportunity, this is a guy that I loved. And even as much as I loved him, I was still shocked he went in the first round. So that tells you how much the Niners really like him and want to utilize him.
I adore Ricky Pearsall, the prospect. He outside of Odunze, he's probably the most obvious guy in terms of if somebody gets hurt, like watch out, because all he needs is the opportunity. And
or
again,
Debo's
really
gone after June 1st.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I really like the Pearsall shout out as well. All right, we'll get out of there on that. Ran through a ton of receivers there, so thank you everybody for sticking with us for the full hour. For Alfredo, thank you so much for joining us again, and for Debro, I'm Ryan Wormeli. We'll see you guys again next time.